Good morning. Welcome to Chumbuk University, the heart of it, and hosted by one of the most distinguished professors of the anthropology department and the initiator of his Intangible Heritage Awards, Professor Anihan, and of course the young Shinwa who makes it all happen with the young staff. Welcome to Cheongju International Intangible Heritage Awards. These have been going on for 5 years, despite the pandemic, I must say. And there's a continuity, they're global, and it's wonderful to have recognition for intangible heritage. And especially why it's important is that there are not many local governments in the world. I cannot think of any local government that actually supports international awards like this. I think Cheongju is quite unique in that sense. And thanks to the city administration, thanks to Center for Intangible Cultural Studies, and thanks to Mayor, and his support. So we want to keep this very informal. This is for archival purposes. So there's documentation for future reference. So how about we introduce ourselves initially very briefly, starting with Madame from Kyrgyzstan.
I am working for a Rural Development Fund. It's a research organization. I'm from Kyrgyzstan, and we are working during the 20 years. This year we have our anniversary. And I am dedicating my 17 years to this organization, and we are working on preserving, collecting, on documenting spiritual and cultural materials of our national heritage.
Fantastic, thank you, Madam. Sarah, over to you.
Thank you. I'm Sarah Green. From the United States, and my organization is A.R.T for Refugees in Transition, A.R.T, which I founded as well 20 years ago. This is our 20th anniversary, and we work with refugees, migrants, indigenous people and communities around the world, and we help them to rebuild through their cultural heritage, by having the elders pass down their traditions to the youngest generation.
Fantastic, Sarah. Thank you. Bill, over to you.
I'm Bill Hauritz. I'm founder of an organisation called Woodfordia, which is geography of land that we purchased, starting from a small traditional festival, the last one of which was 35 years old, has grown into a very large festival in Australia, in southeast Queensland. And it started as a traditional music festival. It's become a very multicultural event with a very strong program of Australian Aboriginal people, among other traditional music. And we've introduced a lot of contemporary music if it's relevant to the times, and it has been very successful. We are not government, we are not-for-profit social enterprise.
Fantastic, Bill. Thank you very much. Sarah, let me get back to you. Your organization has the word transition.
Yes.
That's really important because when you deal with intangible heritage, it's living heritage, it's evolving continuously. Could you tell us a little bit more about the transition side of what you do?
Absolutely. So the communities that we work with are refugees, displaced, marginalized and migrant, meaning that they have most likely been forced out of their homelands. Either they crossed a border or not into another country. And when this sense of displacement happens, traditions, culture, and heritage is usually lost. Not intentionally, but because of the displacement, it's merely forgotten, because these people are working on finding how to have food and shelter and education and safety. And so what we try to do is by encouraging the elders in the community to pass down this heritage to the younger generation, to help to revive the heritage, to help to create a sense of community and identity, and as well the relationships between the generations is reignited. And because they are in a new location, culture and heritage change, as you said, it evolves. And so this is a way for the children as well to reclaim their identity, to learn where they're from and what their heritage is, but also to learn in a new environment and how to adapt it, because throughout history our culture continues to adapt. And now that they are in a new environment, they want to fit in, but they also need to know who they are.
Thank you, Sarah. You remind me of an earlier dialogue discussion, national discourse in Australia, with one very eminent Polish refugee who came out in the Second World War, Professor George Zabruski, a father of Australia's multiculturalism. He and I worked together with the National Museum to deal with some of the issues that you're talking about. So we categorized, the cultures of refugees and immigrants into three: transplanted, transported, and transplanted because refugees literally driven out. Transformed because people, sort of adapt and change. No country is frozen in time. And transformed because continuous evolution of Australian culture as a multicultural society. They remind me of that. So we have very similar kind of challenge or challenges, if you like, in Australia. Now tell me, Madam Akmatavo, rural development. So how do you differentiate from the urban context in Kyrgyzstan? Rural, to what extent is agrarian? Could you explain a little bit more what rural means in your organization?
We are calling our yes. Our country, as you know, it's mountain country, and we are living in a territory mountain place above sea, and 90% of our territory is rural and mountain territories. Of course, of all our topics, all our components, it's towards to rural territory, rural village, and rural development. And we are a research organization which dedicating to research rural issues, rural challenges, and we try to determine our way, our components to make some results on grassroots level, on regional level, and maybe in global level. And I think such naturally that we are calling rural.
Thank you. And the fund is a not-for-profit? You said Rural Development Fund, yeah. Do you get government support?
Oh, thank you for it's such a vain question. Yeah, we are trying to make fundraising from regional commercial structures, regional donor structures, and grant-giving companies at global level. Of course, we have support from government, from local authority, but it's more or less than from international organizations. We are not rich country for oil and for commercial structure, or we are a rural country, where we are agrarian country, we are livestock country, and we have just, I think, two main of our richness. It's natural, our nature and our people. And of course, our government trying to help us, but it's they don't have possible opportunities. But they are helping us, they are supporting us in our activities, maybe when we want to organize some advocacy, lobby level our projects, but we don't have financial support.
Well, we'll come back to it again, but now move on to Bill, Woodfordia. Woodfordia is a cultural landscape with many layers of significance, and it's continuously evolving. As a cultural landscape that's continuously evolving and embedding the living cultures of Australia. And one of the beautiful things that you do is bringing indigenous and immigrant cultures together. Could you tell us a bit more about it?
When we started the festivals, before we even started, we made the statement that we were going to concern ourselves with the development of Australian culture. It should start with our Indigenous people, our First Nations people. So at our very first festival, we made a relationship with the local 2 hours away missionary, old mission, and invited the people to come and speak and to throw boomerangs and talk. And that little program grew into the largest presentation of Indigenous people to white audiences in Australia, which it is today. But with that, as we have learnt a lot of things, I think it would be fair to be critical to call us paternal in the early years until we got to know the issues and the cultures of the people more deeply. And as we understood that, we became aware of the struggle and the difficulty that Indigenous people go through in Australia and I think elsewhere. And we are yet to, as a nation, resolve those differences, which I think I'm hoping this year will be a big step with a referendum that's happening in Australia soon. But at our festival, that relationship is strengthened as you're aware of First Nations culture and the newest cultures developing in Australia. We can't help but miss the very thought that right in Australia, which has the newest migration programs in the world, to a nation of the oldest cultures in the world mixing. And we think that our festival plays a role to help cross that bridge. I can't say whether our program is working, other than to know, without spending any money on advertising, that we have more applications to perform than any festival in Australia, and more people who want to come every year. It's growing faster, and we've now run out of space. Our land is not big enough, so we're at a crossroads.
Yeah, it truly is a living cultural landscape in 4 years now. And thank you, Bill. That's very important. Sarah, getting back to displaced people, refugees, one categories of displaced people, and for a variety of reasons, more and more climate refugees we're getting. And do you deal with climate refugees as well?
We are starting to, yes. Some of the refugees that we work with in Colombia and South America are on the coast in the north, which is beginning to face more and more climate issues. As we've seen right now, there are hurricanes barreling through the United States and leaving a devastating trail behind them, which is similar to what's happening in Latin America and the Caribbean, where there's been many, many more storms from global warming, supposedly. So people are being displaced. And one of the things that I think is important is to capture the heritage and the culture of the people who live in those areas, because, for example, in the north where we're working in Colombia, they are fishermen. And as seas get overfished, as water begins to take over land, people lose their livelihoods, which is also part of their culture. And so we're working with schools now in many countries where we have programs to incorporate cultural heritage and storytelling into the school's curriculum, so that the children then engage with the parents and the grandparents about learning. And it becomes part of the school's curriculum through learning what plants their grandparents used for medicine and for eating, what agricultural tools they used in a science class, writing classes where they learn to write the stories and the history.
Thanks, Sarah. One of the reasons I was asking that question is in the backyard of Australia, we have many Pacific Island nations, and there are two countries which are going underwater, Tuvalu and Kiribati. These countries might not exist. Already there are people being relocated to New Zealand, and New Zealand has come forward with annual immigration program of people. But then there are also from Papua New Guinea, Tani and other places where the water levels are rising. It's creating a certain amount of tensions because people are moving inland as the sea levels rise. They're coming into conflict with other clans and other tribal groups. And but the biggest challenge with climate refugees is that, like if you take Tuvalu and Kiribati, people are leaving, where their ancestors are buried, the sacred sites, the places that they call home. But what they're taking is like refugees, the memories with them. And the documentation of those memories, especially the intangible heritage, once it's out of the territory, out of their landscapes, what does it mean in a new landscape, new home? How do people actually transplant? These are some of the issues. And like earlier on, I said, transformed, transported, and transplanted memories are really challenging. But let me get back to you, Madam, that your rural areas, are they homogeneous or heterogeneous? You have not just Kyrgyz, but also other minority groups. Right?
Yeah.
Could you tell us about them?
People, it's Kyrgyz people, we have A.R.T people, which are very important for our country. We have more than 70 nations in our country. Almost of these people, second group is Russian people, and we have also Ukrainian people, we have people, Uyghur people, and people from Chinese ethnical group. And we have another people like Tatar people, like Belarus, like people which was part of former Soviet Union. They are living in our country. Of course, they have national language, ethnical culture, and we have one organization which uniting these nations. They are calling Union of Nations of Kyrgyzstan, and they are celebrating every year their ethnical celebrity traditions, and we are trying to research traditional culture and spiritual culture of these nations, and we are preparing now some booklet and brochures to publish it yet. But they have their publications, their information.
Thank you, Madam. Still, talking of climate crisis, you deal with conservation strategies in Woodfordia. You raise awareness about climate issues. Could you tell us a bit more about it?
It's a battle on two fronts. Sometimes I think the political right of Australia deny climate as an issue. It's just business and they think it's all fraudulent. So that drifts down into misinformation. So we have a large program every year of speakers, talks, and we even got the Prime Minister to come to the festival, who comes every year, and do major talks on not just about the misinformation, but the strategy, how we can talk to people about spreading the word that it's happening. And on a local front, we are owners of 500 acres of land, and it's in a particular geographic location which is very special. We didn't know when we bought the land how special it is, but there's a gap in the mountains down the whole of the east coast of Australia, and it's the only place where the rain falls coming from the east. If the mountains go into a river that runs west through the mountains and then back into the ocean further south, which means in this particular area the climate for trees and plants is unusual, because in the Brisbane River Valley is the most northern part where temperate trees can grow, and it's the most southern part that tropical trees can grow. And the biggest tree species list in the world is southeast Queensland, northern New South Wales region, which is only 300, 400 kilometres long and 200 kilometres wide of subtropical rainforest. So in that list, as we are replanting the subtropical rainforest species of not just trees but understory, vines, ferns, epiphytes, or plants that live in trees. And we have planted 120,000 trees. We have a survival rate of 30%, because we put them in the ground and water them, but we can't look after so many. And now we started a new project, planting more understory and diversity. And in that space, we have to plant trees that will survive climate shifts. So we've studied the climate shifts. And it appears that where we are, the temperatures will get cooler, not warmer, but it'll be because it will be more overcast, more tropical-like. So we have to plant tropical species in this space and create and prepare wildlife corridors for the future should climate change.
And you draw on the indigenous knowledge system, indigenous intangible heritage, as far as possible. Am I right?
Well, we can involve, and we do involve indigenous people, but the local nation was almost completely destroyed with colonialism. And there's not a lot of existing knowledge from local. But we talk to indigenous people from all over Australia, and where there are pockets of real indigenous ancient knowledge, we listen, but it's not necessarily about the trees and the plants from where we live, from that region. So there's lessons to be drawn and things to learn from the ancient wisdom. But from our local people, it's more a history of colonialism and how Indigenous people have survived colonialism in Australia, which they have. And there's some great stories in that space.
Fantastic. I think one of the most important things we stress a lot through the Center for Intangible Cultural Studies and all of us working on intangible heritage is that intangible heritage does not have borders. It doesn't have borders, and I think you gave a good example that such borders, when you're dealing with living cultures, don't exist. And the reason I'm asking about questions about climate change is that it's right in the face of us. But when we talk about safeguarding intangible heritage, we have to take into consideration the challenges posed by climate crisis. It's no more climate change, it's climate crisis. But let me ask all the three of you, starting with Madame here. If you think of three challenges that your organization is facing, what are those three? Just think aloud. Three challenges.
It's for our countries.
Yep.
First, of course, we have climate crisis, like it's our transporting country in Central Asia. In this year we have very hot weather, and we have our harvest, and now we are start to understanding how we can now live in winter season. It's very dangerous for young people, for vulnerable people, yeah, especially. Second challenge, I think it's our current situation, which we need to adapt to climate crisis and other global cataclysms of our world. And I think we are not ready, and it shows work of our government. It shows our transboundary conflict, which influencing to climate crisis and maybe a climate crisis. It's influencing to a transboundary conflict. I think it's And third, I think we have challenge to lost our traditional culture. And we have every year we have more influence extreme of Islam, and we have under beliefs and moving which dominating under our translation traditional culture. Last month I have participated in Congress of Parliament for Religion, and our voice, main meaning of our voice was it's need to effort our efforts to appeal for that we need to preserve and revive our traditional culture, which consists of the patterns and ways how we can survive in this situation.
Well, thank you. Very challenging. Shared challenges too.
Yes.
Sarah.
Yes. Just to clarify, because we work as an international organization, to our organization ourselves, or as well as the world situation?
No, your organization.
Okay. So unfortunately, now we have the largest number of refugees, migrants ever in the world. And it does not seem to be slowing, which means that there's more and more work to do. Unfortunately, we don't have the staff members to do it. But I think, first of all, the number is growing, and not just from wars, but also from climate crisis. And The second problem or issue that we face, I would say, is despite the growing number of refugees and the increase in this unfortunate situation for so many people, heritage, culture, traditions seem to be the very end of the list of what is being looked at to help. And so funding streams are always at the bottom in terms of where we fit for the importance of supporting and encouraging, archiving, documenting all these cultures that are being lost. And while it is very important, the primary needs of these people, which is food, shelter, medicine, education, safety, without community, without identity, which is all tied to your heritage, these are the underpinnings of society. And if we want society to continue, we need to have this. And I think most importantly of all three things, that perhaps recognition of the importance of culture, of heritage, of identity, to move these communities from being dependent upon aid, relief, to becoming self-sustained. And that happens when you have a community, you have an identity, you have a stake in yourself and your community.
Thanks, Sarah. And culture, health, and well-being, it's a triangulation that is being recognized at last.
Yes.
The World Health Organization with One Health, together with UNESCO, together with World Tourism Organization, everybody. The One Health approach, which includes safeguarding of intangible heritage, when it's translated into reality, will make a difference. And as far as funding is concerned, it's always at the bottom of the pile, because culture, even though we keep on arguing that culture is an integral part of all the 70 sustainable development goals, but certain elites want to only identify with SDG 11 and safe and resilient cities, because the elites come from cities and they drive the discourse. And so they're big challenges that you've raised. We all face those, and Bill, what are the three challenges you face?
Well, I'll just follow on that conversation. I think the issue, the arguments which should be used is economics of why we should record and save the cultures is for good economic reasons. It makes sense. The loss of language. In Australia, we've lost at least 120 nations, languages gone. And Australia, like the USA, is about the same geographical size. But the people are much older. The traditional people are much older than, say, the American Indian. They were very distinct nations, different colour skin, different nasal structures, different eye structures, very different languages that had no relationship to each other for tens of thousands of years. And when that language is lost, so too is the language of medicine, the language of real knowledge that can be commercialised. And here's the issue here. If you study commercialisation of plants, generally in every culture it comes from the knowledge from indigenous people. So the loss of language, loss of a nation's language, which holds the information within the language of the traditions of plants, of knowledge, of systems, that could be used by modern society in a commercial way. It gives a reason to fund the keeping of the traditions and keeping of languages. I make that point, and I've made that point to our government in Australia. I don't know if it's helping, but I think it's a good argument. because all governments concerned about money and standard of living. And as the world gets older, the standard of living is exactly the same in every culture. We all have the same scorecard in every culture. But in First Nations people, what's important to some nations is not important in other nations. So why isn't the standard of living have different scorecards? Am I making sense?
Yeah, absolutely.
So I worry about that. So to answer your question was, could you ask the question again?
The three challenges that you face as an organization.
It's commercial. It's our turnover as an organisation. Our income is 16, almost $17 million annually, and our expenses is 15 and a half, sometimes 16 and a half. So we are very close always to the edge, and it's not clever of us to be like that. So we are vulnerable financially. So we're trying to start new businesses to try and help get the income to take the pressure off one festival a year. And that's a challenge because we don't want to be alive because of government grants. We think if we're dependent on government grants, one day we will most certainly die. I always make the statement that the festival graveyard is full of very good, successful funding applications. And it would be better if we could find our own means of starting businesses. So I can give an example. So we started a touring business into very small, rural and remote areas in Australia, where we'd hire a minibus and duos and small bands, usually one international and one local, to tour into these small bands. And it makes us a little money. We earn maybe $200,000 a year by putting on 60 or 80 concerts a year in rural, remote areas. So we started another business we built some accommodation tents, luxury tents. So we put a high price for wealthy people when they come to the festival.
And they're booked out. I can't get into one.
Yeah, it's booked out. So that makes us about $200,000 a year. So we've got all these plans to make money and invest in small businesses to help us become realistic, and that is our challenge.
Yeah. It's very entrepreneurial, the model that you have through community cultural leadership, and you also have a very strong ethical stance, and you don't take up any kind of offer that comes unless it's ethically grounded in your festival ethos. Am I right?
Absolutely. We couldn't ever have a Coca-Cola sign up at our festival. We couldn't do it.
Thank you.
And that's not just because of Coca-Cola, it's like any commercial operation. Removes from the festival atmosphere, it steals from the atmosphere, it steals from people. But if we were more pure about advertising and how we operate, we wouldn't have the wonderful attendance we get and the good spirit of the festival. And people behave so beautifully at the festival. In the early years, the land we purchased was a dairy farm. It was a very tidy dairy farm. And we turned it into an untidy park. And we planted all these little trees. So in our big festival, we asked people to donate $5 to plant one tree, which was the cost of a box and a stake and the seedling to plant in. And then we got cheeky. We asked them to come back on our May Labor Day long weekend, pay money to come and camp and work planting the trees that they already donated, and turn that into an event we call the planting. And at that event, we've planted 110,000 trees, and some of those are now 40 foot high. And we planted the rainforest species that is beating back the eucalypt forest, which doesn't really belong there when Europeans came. So that's been very successful, and it's given another reason for our patrons who come and buy tickets to the festival don't want advertising or commercial, because they behave themselves, because they planted the tree. Tens of thousands of people have planted the trees there, so they come along and they water the trees.
They take ownership.
Yeah. And it works. It's worked for us. It was a shock to us that it worked.
Yeah.
We thought we should try it. So that's
Beautiful. But that dairy farm that you mentioned before white fellows came, I'm sure it was a fire-stick farm of the indigenous people, with the indigenous species and so on. But now you talked about the challenges, and I think Sarah, this is also the first time to Korea?
Yes.
So all the three of you are coming to Korea for the first time, and all the three of you represent, community-based organizations, and we're very proud, especially as the chair of the jury for the awards. I'm really delighted and honored to be able to interview the three of you. And Jeonju International Intangible Heritage Awards are quite unique in the world, and they add a lot of prestige and value, to what people do, and that's what our experience is for the last 5 years. So tell us, each one of you, how do you think the award will make a difference for you for what you already do? How does it add value?
the short answer is I don't know yet,
Fantastic.
but I intend to find out.
Oh, fantastic.
I need to learn more about it. Our organisation doesn't come from learning about intangible cultural heritage. That was a term I only heard about for the first time at the Smithsonian in 2004. The reason we do what we do is not because we are trying to study intangible cultural heritage. The reason we do it is we love playing the music. And we were musicians, like a cooperative of musicians who came together to start a festival. That is the reason that we did it. And continue, because as we've learnt the stories and as we've engaged other countries and learned about it, we love it even more. So that's the reason we exist. So this is all, when I understand putting in an application to JIAPICH for the prize, I didn't think we qualified. I saw intangible cultural heritage as the academic world of study, from institutionalised study, whereas that's not us. We come from the musos, the musicians, and making parties, putting on good festivals, and that's where we come from. So I'm learning about this world of the academic world and the wonderful work it does and how important it is. I've always understood that, but I've never felt part of it. So I think this prize will help us understand that gap and to help close it.
It's beautiful, Bill. The reason why the 2003 Convention of UNESCO on Safeguarding Intangible Heritage came into being, because of the rapid pace of globalization, and so many cultures were disappearing, so many intangible heritage cultures. It was meant to be an intervention convention as a legal treaty, the 180 countries, is to enable the minimization of the damage that's being done. And what you described is what would be the ideal. You know, I think you have a very pristine kind of approach to what you're doing. But whatever you learn or whatever you understand about the prize, when you do, please share with us. We want to know what you think about it. And also the other thing, language is, there's an undertow of language. When the convention was being drafted, I was in the General Assembly representing the International Council of Museums. There were some countries which argued that language should be a domain. But the majority of us said, no, language is the basis, but it's not an end by itself. So language is not included in the convention, but it is recognized, because if you don't safeguard intangible heritage in the original language, it's no longer intangible heritage. And so there's that undertow. So what difference do you think, Sarah, how do we add value with this award?
Well, I will probably follow you and say that I don't know yet. I cannot unfortunately see into the future. But aside from being absolutely humbled and honored to be given this privilege and prize, when I started this organization, it was not really about intangible cultural heritage. I started it because I wanted to help child refugees, and realized that they needed the trauma that was sustained from displacement was not something necessarily a child can talk about, adults as well, and thought that through the arts that would be a way for them to find a sense of self-expression, a sense of identity, and a way to work in their own words and their own ways through and process this trauma. It turned into being about culture and heritage, because that is what sustains us and makes us who we are. And last year, the organization was accredited by UNESCO, and I can say that with that accreditation, and perhaps I believe with this honor, we have grown a little fast, which is wonderful, but from the exposure and the understanding that the need to preserve the heritage, the need to give a voice to children and to elders, because many times in these situations, there's no attention given to the old people. They've been moved, they've been displaced, and they're forgotten. And yet we forget that they hold what is most valuable to everybody.
The children have moved on with the new culture.
Exactly, and that by being able to bring those back, it's a beautiful, take out the middle generation, because parent and child, it's a complicated. But when you can bring those generations together, you're not only creating healing and community, but you're saving something and perpetuating it. And my hope is through this award, more recognition of that. What I noticed at the UNESCO meeting last December was that there's very little focus on refugees in terms of intangible cultural heritage. We are the only people doing it. Much to my surprise. And I am hoping that this prize will give more visibility to that, to say that intangible cultural heritage is important, and that now more than ever, with the increasing number of refugees from war and from climate crisis, we need to focus on this, and perhaps this will be a way to put some more spotlight on it.
That's beautiful. Thank you, Sarah.
Okay, let me follow.
You started the
You should make me last.
That's why I started here. But
it's most important for our humanity now to preserve, to save our language. I think language is mirror of our culture. And our traditional culture of a mirror of our world, which consists from nature and people. And it will be influencing all of our sphere, our life. And I think now in all organizations like UN and others need to hear voice of indigenous people and traditional culture. I think it's that traditional civilization can give some decisions, patterns, and ways how we can survive in this external situation of humanity. And we need to involve not just in festivals and activities and congress. I think we need to involve in early stage, on development stage of important documents and in the developing of some strategy on policy in UN level. I think it's time to unite our efforts.
Thank you.
If I could just
Sure.
add one thing, which will come from what you just said, which occurred to me, is that one of the benefits of this incredible prize is that you have three people who never would have in any way ever come together to talk and to share ideas. And it's not just, again, about going to a conference and talking, but it's about meeting people, discussing ideas, and actually working and moving forward and taking action. And so this, what you've enabled is to create an environment where this can happen.
Thanks, Sarah. That means a lot to all of us, especially the center who take the responsibility for initiating the prize, and for the jury too, because we were very keen that the awards go to people who are actually working with their fingers in the dirt. Because so often in conferences, even the UNESCO meetings, it's like a little club, more of the same, you know. And Ban Ki-moon, the former UN Secretary General, said, more of the same will not do if you want to make a difference in this world. So it's really wonderful what you said, because all the three of you working with your fingers in the dirt, all the three of you come from very different backgrounds, all the three of you are community grounded. Even though you're dealing with entrepreneurship, you're not commodifying culture. You're safeguarding culture. There's a big difference between commodification and safeguarding. So we really appreciate it. Now the final thing I would like you to do is, you both look at the camera here, and if you can look at the camera there, very loud introduce, this is for the record. I didn't want to introduce the three of you because I felt you should introduce yourselves. For the record, if you could introduce yourselves. You want to start, Sarah? You're sitting right after.
Would you like me to speak about my
No,
organization?
just
or
your
my
name and organization. Yeah.
Hi, I am Sarah Green, and I'm the Executive Director and Founder of A.R.T for Refugees in Transition.
Yeah. Bill?
I'm Bill Hauritz, former Executive Director and founder of Woodfordia, Inc., a small not-for-profit company in southeast Queensland, Australia.
My name is Akmatavo. I'm a director of rural organizations at the organization. It's from Kyrgyzstan, and I'm working for this organization 17 years. And in this year, we will celebrate our anniversary 20 years.
But this is for the archives. And those of you who are listening to the archival material, just go to the JIAPICH website, look up the three organizations to get more information. There's a whole range of information that's on the website and the context for the awards. By the way, I better introduce myself. My name is Galla. I hold the UNESCO Chair on Inclusive Museums and Sustainable Heritage Development in India for the whole Asia Pacific. I'm also Professor of Inclusive Cultural Leadership, and I've been associated with Korea since 2000, that's 23 years, in various capacities. And it's been a privilege and honor to be associated with the Center for Intangible Cultural Studies and Jeonju. And I hope that all of you who access the archives, who are doing research, publishing, look at what was said towards the end by Sarah Green about the value of the awards. The value of awards is not just commodification of what they're doing. The value of the awards is adding value by networking, sharing, so that we can all be strong in what we do, where we are. Thank you very much. Thank you again. Thank you.